4 years ago, County Commissioner Harlan Vance stood on the front porch of my family home in Blackwood Valley, pointed a polished, gold-tipped cane directly at my chest, and told me that broken people do not get to ask where missing water rights go. He stood there in an expensive wool coat, surrounded by deputies who looked at the gravel instead of looking me in the eye. He gave me 12 hours to clear out my father's belongings before county bulldozers arrived to tear down our home. He told me that small towns have long memories, but very little patience for grieving daughters who make noise. He believed he had run me out of the state with nothing more than an old truck, 3 cardboard boxes, and an empty bank account. He truly believed that a broke 22-year-old girl would disappear into the background and fade away. What Harlan Vance did not know was that I did not leave the state. I did not run away to hide, and I did not spend those years crying in the dark. I spent the last 48 months mastering the exact financial laws, land codes, and regulatory loopholes he used to steal my family's heritage. And this morning, during Harlan's live-streamed re-election breakfast at the Silver Pine Country Club, with every local news crew and wealthy donor watching, I walked into that banquet hall carrying the federal seizure orders for every single piece of property, every luxury vehicle, and every hidden bank account he owns. If you have ever felt completely powerless against someone who used their wealth, influence, and arrogance to crush you into the dirt, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Because today's story is proof that when you have patience, discipline, and the law on your side, payback is not just sweet, it is absolute. My name is Maya Cross. To truly understand the look on Harlan Vance's face this morning, you have to understand what Blackwood Valley was before the money arrived. For generations, the valley was a quiet agricultural basin nestled in the high desert of eastern Oregon. It was the kind of place where people measured wealth not by the cars they drove, but by the strength of their soil and the dependability of their word. My father, Thomas Cross, managed the valley's primary cooperative irrigation network for over 35 years. He was an honest, quiet man whose hands were rough from manual labor and whose heart belonged entirely to the land. When neighboring farmers faced severe dry seasons, Dad would quietly redirect our own farm's water supply to keep their crops from withering. He always told me that the soil remembers how you treat people, and that you cannot build a life on stolen ground. Everything began to unravel when the megacorporations came looking for cheap rural land to build massive data centers. These facilities required millions of gallons of continuous water every single day for their industrial cooling systems. Almost overnight, water rights in Blackwood Valley became far more valuable than gold. That was when Harlan Vance decided to turn our community into his private financial empire. Harlan was the kind of politician who had never worked an honest day in his entire life, yet acted as though he owned the breath in everyone's lungs. His nephew, Garrett Cole, held the position of chief county zoning assessor, and Arthur Sterling, the president of the valley's largest local bank, was his closest partner. Together, the three of them operated like a syndicate. One stormy night, Dad came home later than usual. He walked into the kitchen, his face pale and his hands shaking so violently that his coffee spilled across the table. He pulled a thick leather binder from under his jacket and laid it out before me. Dad had discovered a massive financial paper trail. Harlan Vance was secretly tampering with the municipal water meters, falsifying severe drought shortages on small family ranches, and issuing fraudulent emergency utility liens against them. When the farmers inevitably could not afford the fabricated penalties, the county foreclosed on their property deeds, transferring the valuable water rights into a private offshore dummy corporation called High Basin Holdings. Dad looked at me that night and said he was driving straight to the State Department of Agriculture on Friday morning to hand over the original records to state prosecutors. He never got the chance. On Thursday evening, Dad received an urgent call claiming that a main irrigation valve on Miller's Ridge was malfunctioning. He took his pickup truck out onto the winding mountain road to fix it. He never made it down the mountain. The county sheriff, who attended the same weekly poker games as Harlan and Garrett, inspected the scene for less than 2 hours before officially closing the case as an accidental brake failure. There was no forensic investigation. There was no examination of the severed brake lines. Dad was buried on a cold Tuesday morning, and the men who killed him did not even have the decency to stay away from the cemetery. Less than 48 hours after the funeral, Garrett Cole arrived at our front gate in a county patrol car, waving an emergency eviction notice. They claimed my father had embezzled over $2 million from the irrigation cooperative, leaving behind massive municipal tax debts that gave the county the legal right to seize our ranch immediately. I stood on the front porch as Harlan Vance stepped out of his black SUV, leaning on his gold-tipped cane. He looked around our 300-acre property with a smug, mocking grin. He told me I had until 6 the next morning to leave the county forever. He warned me that if I stayed, Garrett would have me arrested for criminal obstruction of public property. I looked Harlan dead in the eye and told him that my father built the very ground he was standing on. Harlan only laughed in my face, leaned in close with the smell of cheap mint and expensive bourbon on his breath, and told me that my father was nothing more than a stubborn peasant who did not know his place in the world. I packed 3 boxes of clothes, my father's backup computer hard drives, and the hidden paper receipts he kept under the floor of the pump shed. When I drove across the county line in the dark at 4 in the morning, I did not shed a single tear. I knew that crying would only waste energy, and I was going to need every ounce of strength I had left. They thought I ran away to California to live with distant relatives. They thought I would fade into obscurity, defeated and forgotten. Instead, I moved to the state capital, just 4 hours north. I cashed out my father's modest life insurance policy, rented a tiny basement studio apartment, and enrolled in a rigorous dual-degree university program focused on forensic accounting and municipal regulatory law. For the next 4 years, while Harlan Vance built multi-million-dollar luxury estates across our stolen valley, my entire world revolved around spreadsheets, corporate tax filings, and complex financial statutes. I worked 18 hours a day, barely slept. I lived on black coffee, cheap bread, and cold noodles. Whenever my eyes burned from staring at tax forms late into the night, I looked over at a small framed photograph on my desk. A photo of my dad standing beside the irrigation canal in his faded denim jacket, smiling warmly. I promised him every night that justice was coming. By my 3rd year, I passed my professional licensing exams with top honors and secured an entry-level position inside the State Department of Revenue's Special Asset Investigations Division. 6 months later, because of my deep knowledge of rural utility codes, I was assigned to a specialized joint federal-state task force investigating municipal corruption and infrastructure fraud. I did not act immediately. I knew that when you are dealing with deeply rooted corruption, striking too early allows the real criminals to sacrifice a scapegoat and walk away with their fortunes intact. You have to wait until they become entirely comfortable. You have to let their unchecked greed make them careless. Over the course of 10 painstaking months, I mapped out every single dollar that flowed through High Basin Holdings. I traced every wire transfer, every offshore bank account in the Caribbean, every forged land lien, and every real estate acquisition Harlan, Garrett, and Arthur Sterling made between 2022 and 2026. And they had indeed grown careless. Because they believed Blackwood Valley was their untouchable kingdom, they began using public municipal bonds as collateral to take out massive personal commercial loans from Arthur Sterling's bank. They had leveraged their own mansions, their private car collections, and their high-end commercial properties against the water rights they had stolen from innocent families. The final piece of evidence came when I uncovered the digital signatures embedded within the forged property transfers. Garrett Cole had used his personal administrative security key to alter the digital registry on the county servers. Harlan Vance had not just stolen my family's land. He had systematically orchestrated the financial destruction of 72 generational family farms across the entire valley, embezzling over $42 million in public assets. Last month, I presented an 800-page forensic audit report to a secret joint federal grand jury. The evidence was so undeniable that the jury took less than an hour to return 32 sealed criminal indictments for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and grand larceny, alongside emergency federal civil asset forfeiture warrants ordering the immediate seizure of everything High Basin Holdings owned. As the lead investigative auditor on the task force, I requested permission to serve those seizure warrants in person. That brings us to this morning. The Silver Pine Country Club was packed with over 200 local business owners, wealthy political donors, and television news crews for the annual Blackwood Valley Prosperity Breakfast. Harlan Vance was standing on stage behind an ornate mahogany podium, boasting about his supposed accomplishments and preparing to announce his upcoming campaign for state senate. Garrett Cole and Arthur Sterling were sitting proudly at the VIP table right beside the stage. Harlan was in the middle of talking about his vision for economic growth when the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom were thrown wide open. 6 uniformed state troopers entered first, followed by 8 armed federal marshals. The entire room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped completely, and the cameras turned toward the entrance. I walked down the center aisle wearing a sharp business suit, holding a thick black leather folder. Harlan stopped mid-sentence. His hand gripped the sides of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. As I drew closer and he finally recognized my face, the arrogance drained from his eyes. His skin turned a sickly gray color, and he visibly stumbled backward against the backdrop. Garrett Cole jumped out of his chair, yelling that this was a private civic event and demanding that security throw me out of the building. But before he could take 2 steps, 2 federal marshals stepped in front of him, pressing him firmly back into his chair. I walked directly onto the stage, stood right beside Harlan Vance, and plugged a portable hard drive into the master projector unit. The massive display screens throughout the banquet hall instantly changed from Harlan's campaign slogan to a certified federal asset balance statement. Across every screen, the total balance for High Basin Holdings flashed in bold red letters. $0.00, seized by order of the United States District Court. I adjusted the podium microphone, looked Harlan in the eyes, and let my voice carry across the entire room. I told him that 4 years ago he said broken people do not get to ask questions. I told him he was right because broken people do not ask questions, they build cases. I opened the binder and placed the federal documents onto the lectern in front of him. I announced to the entire room that Harlan Vance, Garrett Cole, and Arthur Sterling were under immediate federal arrest for multi-million-dollar wire fraud and illegal land seizure. I declared that every property, vehicle, bank account, and commercial development tied to their enterprise was officially seized, and that every stolen acre of land and water right was being returned to the original families and their heirs. The banquet hall descended into absolute chaos. Reporters rushed the stage with flashing cameras, shouting questions at the commissioner. Garrett Cole made a frantic run toward the kitchen doors, only to be tackled to the ground and handcuffed against a serving table. Arthur Sterling sat entirely motionless, his face buried in his hands as state troopers surrounded him. Harlan Vance stood trembling, his voice cracking as he tried to stammer that he had built this valley with his own hands. I looked at him calmly and told him that my father built this valley, that he was nothing more than a thief who stole from hard-working people, and that his time was officially up. The federal marshals cuffed Harlan's hands behind his back right there at the podium, in full view of the cameras and every person he had spent decades intimidating. As they marched him down the aisle and out into the waiting transport vehicles, his gold-tipped cane slipped from his fingers, clattering uselessly onto the floor and rolling under an empty table. Watching them being driven away under heavy police escort, I did not feel hatred or anger. All I felt was a deep, unshakable sense of peace. Men like Harlan Vance build their entire lives on fear, arrogance, and the belief that ordinary people are too weak to fight back. But real strength is quiet. It is disciplined, it is patient, and it is capable of tearing down empires of corruption, one single truth at a time. If this story gave you chills and reminded you that justice always catches up in the end, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every single week.